Good morning, everybody. Buenos días. Es un día increíble aquí en Sevilla. ¿Cuántos españoles tenemos entre nosotros? Manos arriba. Hoy, ok. Oh, muy bien. 4 aquí. Pues no sé si os importa si hablo un poco en inglés también para los otros visitantes que están aquí con nosotros. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Christian, for a wonderful welcome and for your leadership of the Events Management Group, Media Group, and also obviously to Frederick. I'd also like to thank the Global Resilience Council and Jacobs Media. You know, it feels a world away from Perth, Australia, where we at WTTC have just celebrated our 24th Global Summit only 2 weeks ago. I've worked in travel and tourism now for many, many years, and even after all that time and seeing so many incredible destinations, it never ceases to amaze me just how much world there is out there, how much diversity, how much there is to discover. You know, in 1949, Prime Minister Nehru wrote to the children of a newly independent India, "We live in a wonderful world that is full of beauty, charm, and adventure. There's no end to the adventures we can have if only we can seek them with our eyes open." That adventurous and open spirit he wrote about is what animates our sector. And as travel and tourism is set to break all records, as we've heard in 2024, we have to look to the future with our eyes open to ask how can we ensure that that great growth is sustainable and inclusive so our world can be full of beauty, charm and adventure forever. Well, I am glad to say that I came home from Perth more excited than ever about the future of our sector. 2024 is set to be a record year. Travel and tourism is forecast to contribute over $11 trillion to the global economy. Ahora en español son billones, pero en inglés trillones. And over the next 10 years, we predict that it will generate over 100 million new jobs. We will end up this year with 348 million people working in our sector. That's bigger than the population of the USA. And in the next 10 years, we'll be contributing a whopping $16 trillion to the global GDP. And what's very interesting is that if you look at the growth expected in the global economy, it's going to be about 2.4%. In our sector, we're going to be growing at 3.7%. Anyway, these are a lot of numbers, I know, but what they mean is travel and tourism is opening up the world at an even faster pace than before, not only through emerging destinations and helping more travelers see new places, but by putting money in people's pockets and by developing regional and national economies. We're witnessing this happening now in India and China, 2 key markets. 75 years after Prime Minister Nehru wrote the words I just quoted, millions of families in India are traveling the world for the very first time. India is one of the strongest emerging markets. India's travel and tourism GDP is forecast to be the 4th largest by 2034. And China is going to overtake the US over the next 10 years as the largest travel and tourism market. This isn't just a recovery from COVID, it's a complete reorganization of our sector and a new era of travel and tourism, where many more people than ever before in history have access to explore the rest of the world. In this new era, it's more important than ever that our growth, as we've heard, is sustainable, both for our planet that our sector depends on, and for the wonderful communities that depend on our sector. I loved your quote, Christian, that we don't want to be extras in our own movie. It's so true. The great news is that travel and tourism has decoupled its GDP growth from its emissions intensity. I'm here with my SVP, Virginia Messina, today, and she was telling me that now there are quite a substantial number of countries that not net emissions associated with travel and tourism, but their actual total emissions are going down, and this is growing, and I'm sure Virginia later will be able to give you a bit more background on that. So we are decoupling our GDP growth from our emissions intensity. And that obviously means that as we grow rapidly, our emissions are not growing at the same rate. And as I said, Virginia's going to tell you a little bit more about that. This morning, I want to talk to you briefly about some of the biggest sustainability challenges as we plan the future of travel and tourism, and about the steps we're already taking as a sector. As Christian said, and Rajan said, you know, we are very, very solution-driven. That's what we do in our sector. We seek to find solutions to things. So let's look at our environmental impact. From my time spent in Western Australia, I met Indigenous leaders from across the sector. Now, when we talk about Indigenous leaders, the Europeans have been in Australia for just under 200 years. The Aboriginal culture was there for 60,000 years. It's the oldest civilization that we know in the world, older than civilizations in Africa. And they now act as a big movement in Indigenous tourism, and they act to protect some of the world's most endangered species and plants and animals, which it was incredible to see their work. But at the same time, they open their arms to visitors like me while still protecting their natural environment. As a sector, I think we can learn their example. Last year, travel and tourism was responsible in total for 6.7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. As I said, that is lower than in 2019 when the figure was 7.8. But the current figure, as we were saying, and as John Kerry said, 6.7% that we contribute to the destruction of our planet is still too high. Solutions like sustainable fuels are some of the most promising for reducing our sector's carbon footprint, but we're not producing anywhere near enough of them. And when people point their finger at aviation, I always say aviation doesn't make its own fuel, it has to buy fuel. And at the minute, governments have the technology and the regulation to produce much more sustainable aviation fuel, but they are not taking that step, and it's not something airlines can do on their own. They don't produce jet fuel. So we need to encourage governments to incentivize the production of SAF. Currently, we're still only producing about 0.1% of what we need. And it's something that travel and tourism doesn't always talk about aviation, but we are absolutely inextricably linked. And we all need to, whether we're in the hotel sector, hospitality sector, we need to stand up and support aviation's need for those kind of sustainable fuels. So, that was me going off script about SAF, as I do, because I'm feeling very passionately about it. But if you look at it we actually need over 1 trillion litres of sustainable fuel, and that's 12 zeros. It's an absolute huge amount. So, as I say, please let's join together. Please make the case for our sector, because it's absolutely critical way that we can decarbonise. The other area, obviously, is ground transport. Ground transport represents quite a lot of our greenhouse gas emissions, and it's really important that we look to try and electrify as much as we can across our sector. Certainly, we're benefiting like other sectors because fewer people are using less fuel, less coal, so we're reducing our reliance on coal, but our reliance on oil still remains very, very high. One of the practical things that we've done at WTTC is create something called the Hotel Sustainability Basics. This is a verification scheme for hotels that want to take the first step on the journey to becoming sustainable. We know that members like that I have, the IHGs, the Hiltons, they all have very, very sophisticated sustainability teams, but it's estimated that 80% of our hotel sector is made up of small and medium hotels, and they really, really need support. And when they looked at some of the certification schemes out there, which are brilliant, brilliant, but they were so hard. You needed sort of, a PhD in astrophysics to be able to understand them. And they couldn't make that first step on the journey. So at WTTC, we've created something for the sector, by the sector. It's now available. Over 5,000 hotels are signed up to the Hotel Sustainability Basic Scheme, and we do it at cost. And it's now been recognised by Travelist as one of the schemes that is recognised more broadly. And I see Inge is here from Radisson, who has actually been one of the key people instrumental into driving basics. So it's really doing practical things, not just talking the big numbers and doing the data. But the importance about the data is when I arrived in this sector, nobody actually knew what our footprint was in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And if you don't know if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So it is very important that we have very accurate data and we control our own narrative and we control our own destiny. Well, it's absolutely wonderful. I was here at the Alcazar last night, and I've been, really, really privileged to see some beautiful parts of Seville. I've been to Seville before, and I always have a piece of Seville in my fridge because I'm one of these mad English people that makes that very bitter marmalade, English marmalade, and I actually get marmalade sent from Seville to my house, and it takes me 3 days to cook it. I end up in a complete sticky state. But I always have a piece of sunny Seville. So, it is one of the most incredible places in the world. So it's known for its oranges. So who knew that Rita Hayworth from the 1940s Hollywood films was actually born in Seville? Who knew that the poet Antonio Machado, who I thought was from the north of Spain, actually was born here in Seville? So Seville, and who knows, maybe even now Christopher Colon. We certainly now know he's Spanish. Exactly where he was from in Spain, we don't know. So Seville has, many, many treasures. But I just really want to pause and talk about the big issue of the day, which is how travel and tourism lives and works with the communities that we serve. I think it's really, really important that we listen to the communities. We do not want the Disneyfication of any part of our beautiful, whether it's Seville or wherever it is in Spain or wherever it is in the world. The first thing to say, when I was in Perth, 80% of the audience desperately, I would actually say 90%, desperately want more tourism. These are parts of Africa, parts of the Caribbean, places that absolutely their economies depend on travel and tourism. And remember, travel and tourism lifts a lot of people out of poverty globally. It employs women, it employs young people, and it lifts people out of informal economies into more secure economies. So it has a great, powerful force. Secondly, let's look in the good balance, so what side of the balance. It creates a lot of jobs. Here in Spain, it's probably responsible for about 15% of the economy. Here in Seville, it's responsible for about 25% of the economy. It's a lot of jobs, so these things are very good. What else does it do? It actually helps protect patrimony, and it helps protect cultures. I was talking to the mayor of Andalusia yesterday, and he was saying to me that actually tourism is great because some of the arts and skills and artisanal skills that you find in Seville and Andalusia are actually supported by tourism, because tourists want to have very, very authentic experiences. And some of those skills and some of that gastronomy may have actually disappeared had it not been for visitors. So that's all in the good bucket, on the good side. On the opposite side, clearly people, communities need to not just hear those numbers, but feel those numbers. Feel that tourism is really relevant to them and it brings a benefit. And if they don't, then we really are not growing a sustainable tourism sector. And I heard one great speaker at my summit said, if tourism doesn't ensure that local people feel happy and enriched by tourism, I don't want tourism. And that's what he said. So I completely agree with that. So what do we do when you get really popular hotspots? Well, as we said right at the beginning, it's about destination management. We have, the mayor here now has live data about people flows. It's about looking at people flows. How can you encourage people not to only go to the most popular part, but with flexible pricing and timings and looking at things off-season? How can you actually encourage tourists to go to other parts? A great example of this in my lifetime has been New York. When I was young, you only went to Manhattan ever. And then New York really got its act together and they created the 5-borough program. And now, Brooklyn, that wasn't even heard of, is actually probably more trendy and more heard of than anywhere else. So we need to actually be able to manage the flows of people. Here in Seville, they are looking, is it the Plaza España or Plaza Mayor? Plaza España or Plaza Mayor aquí? Plaza España. Here, I always get the two confused. So the Plaza España here was actually built. It's the most incredible, as those that you know it, and you must see it. It's got very, very, very delicate mosaics. It actually wasn't built as a square to be visited. It was built originally to be private. But it has opened up to the world. It now receives 3 million visitors a year. Let me put that in context. The whole of Brazil only receives 6 million visitors a year. And this little square here in Seville, Brazil's not doing as well as it needs to, but this little square is receiving all those people. So what they are planning, and they sometimes say, in the private sector, you're against charges, you're against this. I said, no, we need to do what's right in each individual case. They're looking at putting a small charge in, so that that probably will have an element of reducing the people that go into the plaza, but also that money will be absolutely directed at restoring the mosaics and also paying for sort of security and people to protect the square. Now that makes good sense. So what I'm trying to say is there are solutions. In Dubrovnik, which if you've ever been there, is the tiniest walled city in Croatia, and the cruise ships used to come at all different times. Well, I found out that actually cruise ships are not allowed to talk to each other to agree, you come at 10 o'clock, I'll come at 11 o'clock. That's anti-competitive and breaches competition laws. So what they did is they worked with the local government there in Dubrovnik, who said, can you please only come 1 hour, and we want you all to be finished by 11 a.m. So that's exactly what's happened. They've spread their arrivals out. The last ship comes at 11 a.m. and then local people feel Dubrovnik's theirs again. So there are great solutions. And I just wanted to end by wishing you all a really, really successful event. You're going to be hearing some very interesting leaders and drilling down. And I'm going to be around as well, so if anyone would like to talk to me about anything. But it's been great. Thank you for inviting me here. Bye-bye.